One man, one mission, to rid the world of chronic anxiety once and for all. The Anxiety Guy, Dennis Simsek, shares his personal transformation from living a life filled with overwhelming worry to becoming a full-fledged positivity machine, a leading authority in generalized anxiety. Dennis gets to the truth of your mental health challenges and sets you on a path to transforming each and every area of your life. Here he is, the one and only, the Anxiety Guy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Daring Dancer Summit. My name is Judy Meredith, and today I am interviewing Dennis Simsek, aka the Anxiety Guy. Dennis is a certified coach, a self-help author, and a motivational speaker. He has already helped thousands of people. Welcome to this summit, Dennis.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be a part of this. And hopefully I can add some value to the listeners out there.
I can assure them that you will. I can assure them. I've done a lot of research on you.
Good.
Very, very interesting guy, very accomplished with regard to this topic that we're on.
Perfect.
So with that being said, I'd like to jump right in and have you tell listeners a little bit about your struggle. Growing up, I know you had parents, friends, and teachers, and they all had dreams for you as a pro athlete going forward in your life. Can you speak to that a little bit?
The thing is Judy, I was thrown into a life where I wasn't really sure whether or not I wanted that dream for myself or those goals for myself. And it was coming from teachers, parents, everyone kind of went, whoa, there's the prodigy. He's going to be this tennis star in the future. So growing up, I was never a real child. I wasn't one of the kids that went out and played with their friends and you know, in a loose kind of fun way. I always had this set schedule where I woke up in the morning, went trained for 3 hours before school started, had my school day, and then in the afternoon and the evening, I was back on the tennis court. So that carried on for years and years and years. So basically, I was just thrown into this pressure-filled world, and something I wasn't really sure of in myself. I had no opinion. So if I had an opinion as far as, Dad, you know, we should do things this way, or Mom, we should do things this way, I mean, there's no chance that I was going to get listened to. So growing up, you know, it was really difficult to go from that life where I needed caretakers, that life where I needed people to tell me what to do. And then in my adulthood, hitting that road and going, oh my goodness, I'm all by myself now. You know, I'm sort of a tennis professional, but I'm not making much money. I can't really take care of myself. You know, what am I going to do now? So I know there's a lot of people out there that have similar struggles growing up and having those caretakers, and then going up to their teens and in their adult years where they go, okay, what do I do now? But it was definitely a place where I felt like I was not a part of a group as far as people in my high school and my elementary school and such. I was kind of the outsider. And as the outsider, I lived a life where, you know, I didn't see that I was as free as the other kids mentally, spiritually, emotionally. So that hurt me as I went towards my teens and my adulthood big time.
It sounds like you carried a very heavy burden for a youngster and didn't have the freedom to play and grow and develop like other youngsters were doing, and you had like an adult schedule imposed upon you. Totally. That's tough. I can see where you grew once you did reach age of majority, you felt very unprepared. I have to ask you, that's almost traumatic, but how did all of those pressures and that schedule and the lack of ability to play, how did that affect you in adulthood? What's going on now? Do you think that was the genesis or the beginning of your anxiety issues? Or
big time. Okay. I mean, it kind of led me onto a path where during my adulthood, you know, as I was growing up, I had this anxiety over everything. I mean, how do I socialize with people since I never socialized as a kid? How do I turn into this person that I've never really had any training with in my life? I mean, how do I deal with social interactions, career choices, How do I do anything? So I basically was given this, tiny little spoon, and I had to dig my way out of life by myself. So that was really, really tough. That was really tough. And I realized that in my early 20s, GAD struck me really, really hard on a daily basis, simply because I didn't know what to expect. Whereas when I was a kid, I knew what to expect. I knew what the next day was going to look like, and the next week, and the next month, and so on. So as an adult, that was very traumatic. It was a day-to-day process. So you can almost say that my anxiety started between, the ages of 0 and 10, where I was starting to mold myself as a person, find my identity, my persona there. So it started really young. And then as I went into my teens and my adulthood, it just grew stronger and stronger. And, I was living a life where I was very unconscious. I was very mindless, like a lot of people out there live today. And when we live so instinctually, it can really backfire, because we don't stop and think and go, where is this coming from? When did it start? How can I change some of these patterns? What can I do? Our parents can't teach us what they don't know. So I was at the point where I had to learn these things. I had to stop, and I had to create some awareness, some acceptance as far as where I was in my life and what direction it was going. But I had to train myself all over again, but unfortunately, there's people out there that I'm working with through CBT and NLP as a practitioner myself that have never really stopped and thought about these things, because they're living instinctually. What their parents gave them, what their friends gave them, their teachers, those are the things that they're holding on to, and those are the belief systems that they keep running, and therefore creating much more anxiety. So that really was something, as I am here in this point in my life, where it fuels me to help people that have in fact gone through the same stuff that I have. Mm-hmm. So totally. As far as being a kid and then going into adulthood, it was this roller coaster ride that seemed never ending, really.
Okay, and for you, GAD struck. Can you tell the listeners what is GAD?
GAD is a never-ending worrying cycle over almost every aspect of your life. And it's basically this spider web of events where if I have anxiety over, let's say, my social situations, then that can trigger a snowball effect onto other aspects of my life. Therefore, my career, or, again, relationship building, or my family, my leisure time, my hobbies, everything. It can really lead from one thing to another, because I realize that what the mind tends to do, it tends to group things together, right? So if I've got this general anxiety, if I start to become overwhelmed by some aspect of my life, that can really trigger a response to another aspect, and it kind of attaches itself to everything else. So
the G in GAD is generalized anxiety disorder.
Exactly.
So you're explaining it beautifully.
Yeah.
How you got anxiety over here, well, suddenly it shows up over there as well. So it's all over the map.
All over the map. And GAD is something where it doesn't get talked about enough because of, the stigma out there, and people are very, they're kind of backing up as far as speaking up about their anxiety, their general anxiety, to their bosses or their friends or their family members, because they don't want to be a burden, number one, and they don't want people to think of them as being weak or anything like that. So there's a number of reasons why. If we got injured, let's say our leg got injured or something, we would ask for help. We'd go out and we'd go, we're in pain and such. But as far as the emotional pain goes, that's another level that, in society, especially in the Western culture, I realized that it's very, very difficult to approach people and go, boss, I have general anxiety. Because if you don't understand where that person is coming from, if you haven't experienced that yourself, there is no chance for you to come from a place of understanding. Therefore, you'll think it's just stress.
Absolutely. And the attitudes of people around you will be different than if you came up with, say, some kind of other illness, and then where you get not, you get empathy from people and they care about you. But if you get this, they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on with him or her? And so you're really, the person with this is being asked to do something that is super hard because they have it,
yes,
which is to come out with it, because really that's important, isn't it? To just come out and go for it.
That's the thing, is that, a lot, when we talk about general anxiety and what I went through for a number of years with, which was health anxiety, which was hypochondria.
Yes.
That was something where I lived a daily life where if I had a sensation or a symptom that popped up, I automatically connected that to the worst possible outcome there was on Google, which was either a brain tumor or it was a heart attack that was inevitable or anything like that. Because when we Google, let's say, a headache, the first thing that pops up is, the worst. So, yeah.
Well, you are certainly the real deal. You have been through this. You have conquered this. You probably still walk daily with this, because we do when we have anxiety, and you can show other people now. And before we, I want to ask about that, but before we go on, I know that there are some myths regarding GAD. Did you want to cover those, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, the myths, the list is pretty long, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. One is that general anxiety sufferers are weak people. And that is something that is completely false, because I've worked with over 3,000 people through neuro-linguistic programming and cognitive behavioral therapy that have, in fact, created incredible transformations in a very short amount of time. So when you give these people the inspiration, the drive, if you can connect enough pleasure to a future state with these people and go, hey, do you really want to be suffering like this in a year or two, or do you want to be living, abroad, or, starting that business, or to being a motivational speaker, whatever it is about your condition? They start to go, my God, I never thought about it that way, right? So there's almost like this switch that when I talk with people, when I discuss different techniques around CBT, it's almost like this trigger that goes off, this positive trigger. And that kind of gets them going, okay, yeah, maybe I can do this. And when you start to, because the power that I have is that I can relate. It's not so much CBT. It's not so much the skill sets. It's not so much the subconscious mind, speaking to them in a in a transic kind of way. It's the idea that I can relate. So when someone asks me a question, I'm going, yeah, I can answer that. And therefore we create this dialogue, which they've never had before.
That's right? Amazing. That's healing.
That's 50% right there.
Yeah.
But again, going back to the myths, number one is that general anxiety disorder sufferers are weak. And that's the farthest thing from the truth, because these people are some of the strongest people because they fight this on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I had a friend once who, and I was also myself, but she was terribly afraid to fly. We were on a plane together going somewhere, and she was beating herself up, just like you just said, like, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm so weak. And I just had to say to her, and I pointed this out, I said, you know what? No, you are the courageous one, because a lot of these people on this plane right now don't have this fear that you have. You have it, but guess what? You're still on the plane. So it's the courage to do that, and the courage to live life and to step out. So a lot of times people who have anxiety really have to be more courageous rather than weak. I think that's just me. That's my opinion.
You hit it. You hit the nail right on the top of that hammer there. But that is exactly what it is, because, I mean, this is such a cycle. It's such a pattern that people play out daily. When they wake up in the morning, there's a certain cycle that they run. In the afternoon, there's like, around 1 or 2 p.m., some people are like, that's the time where I get my panic attack. That's the time where I get my heightened anxiety levels. It's like this unconscious reminder of what, where you need to be on a daily basis.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to talk about your riding the wave with panic.
Totally.
Yeah, because I watched, I think it was a YouTube video that you did, which was excellent, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, listeners should go find that because I thought it was great. But you talk about riding the wave, and you suggest, you have recommendations for behavioral changes that you can make during a panic attack, which is kind of counterintuitive, or maybe just flies in the face of what we're told to do.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about for a minute, how does one ride the wave? What are the do's and don't do's with that?
You know, riding the wave came to me during the height of my panic disorder / GAD / health anxiety. And it was almost like you said, you mentioned counterintuitive, because I mentioned this idea that we have to get to a point where we recognize some of the patterns that we're running that's causing more anxiety, that's causing more adrenaline, right? It's really difficult to stop a panic attack through your thoughts. You know, it's really difficult. When you get it to a point where, you know, you're faced with a situation where it's just full blown and everything's kind of going on chaos in your world, you're dizzy, you're feeling these sensations, it's difficult to stop it there. It really is. But riding the wave means that, you know, the amygdala, which is the part of our brains that's responsible for the fight or flight response, can only learn through exposure. Okay. So the goal here, and I got to a really strange point in my life where I was actually hoping that anxiety and panic would show up. Mm-hmm. I got to a point where I was so comfortable with this practice session, these 3 words that I was using on a daily basis, which were ride the wave, which involves, in fact, breaking a pattern. And my idea of riding the wave was that, first and foremost, I had to catch myself when I started to ruminate, number one. So I used things like elastic bands. I grabbed an elastic band and I would snap that elastic band when I felt like I was ruminating over these thoughts, over these feelings, what's going to happen, catastrophic thinking, mind reading, all these negative automatic thoughts that GAD sufferers go through. So I caught it in the initial stages. That was number one. And to do that, we had to practice mindfulness. I mean, if I was just instinctively going through my day and I felt my heart palpitations going, the first thing I would do was call the emergency, right?
Yes.
So I had an elastic band. Therefore, I snapped that elastic band. I caught it. And then I moved to ride the wave, which means that I'm not fighting. I'm not freezing. I'm not running from. What I'm doing, in fact, is doing the opposite. I'm moving with my fear. And this is kind of a challenging phase where you challenge some of those thoughts, you challenge some of those feelings based around the evidence from the past. So I went, man, there's so much evidence to me. I'm here, I'm alive, right? I'm breathing. I must have overcome, 1,000 heart attacks. I must have overcome all these brain tumors. And I had a number of tests done just like everybody else. So in that moment where I ride the wave, I ride the sensations, I move with my thoughts, I don't fight against it, I don't try to delete it from my world, I just basically move with it, therefore breaking the cycle. And the other thing was I had to create this imagination, this image of, for me, which was Daffy Duck. Daffy Duck was the very image that was my subconscious, my core beliefs that was telling me, you're going to die from a panic attack. You're never going to make it past this one. This is the one that's going to get you, or whatever it is, right? So I had to create some dialogue with my subconscious mind, and I had to create dialogue with Daffy Duck. And when Daffy Duck told me that I was going to, in fact, be a failure for the rest of my life, I was going to fear everything, I was going to have anxiety forever, I questioned it because of the association between me and Daffy Duck, which was, hey, it's Daffy Duck, and it's not a monster, it's a fly. And when I looked at it in a different way and just looked at it as something that was buzzing around my face rather than overwhelming me, the words were less powerful, right? And then I moved from catching, riding the wave, to letting the storm pass. And letting the storm pass, which was the third wave, was I needed to turn my attention to my physical world. I needed to let my adrenaline basically wear out. There was a lot of just ruminating and adrenaline flowing and all that stuff. And I needed to really practice this idea of mindfulness. And I had to, which I did, I became a photographer. So I grab my camera, I'd go outside and I'd take some photos and such. I did whatever I could to turn my attention from my inner world to my outer world. So what could I see? What could I feel? What could I hear? Right? These are things that I did during that third level, from catch, ride the wave to let the storm pass. And if birds were chirping, I'd focus in on those. And it all took practice. It really did. But it got to the point where I was really comfortable with those symptoms and any kind of thoughts, because a thought was just a thought at that point. And that was powerful.
And I love the way you personified those thoughts with Daffy Duck, because it's very fitting. It's very apt. It's an apt personification. And before it seemed really like huge to you. And now you were like, wait a minute, that voice, that's not telling me the truth. And it's,
totally.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that. And I imagine people could come up with all kinds of different personas to give to
Absolutely.
dialogue with that voice.
I mean,
and I love that you said don't flee, because everybody who has panic, that's what they do. They flee the scene wherever they are. You're saying stay there.
Stay there. Stay with it. If you're grocery shopping, stay with it. You've survived every panic attack. You've survived every thought. You've survived all these false illusions that your mind is putting you through and your body's putting you through. And there is no reason to go on Dr. Google and check what your symptoms are, to call your emergency, to do these things, to go to your comfort zone, because there's a certain cycle that moves very, very quick with this idea. And that is that, number one, the first thing we tend to do is become curious. So curious as to what this thought is, where it's coming from, the feeling and all that sort of stuff. So this curiosity tends to set in, right? And then really closely after that, we tend to go towards coping methods. So coping methods, what do we tend to do? We go to our safety room in our bed. We call that friend. We hide under the covers. We take medication. Of course, there's always a time and place for medication. I'm never going to be the type that says, don't, because I know the pain that people go through, and there's always a time and a place, and it's very important that with your doctor, you do come up with a plan, and you do tackle this as naturally as you can, so you don't get this reliance on medication. But again, it all came down to me with awareness and acceptance. I had to accept that what I was going through, all those feelings that I had, all those sensations were related to anxiety. That was a huge part of it all. That was a huge part of it all.
And you talked about the amygdala and the brain triggering all this. And in order to change that, you've got to relearn. And so if you are fleeing places and you aren't accepting, then you end up, it doesn't get the opportunity to relearn.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
If you're scared of dogs, it's, for example, for me, I'll just go through this really quick, Judy.
Sure.
When it was like, let's say dogs or something that I was fearful of, some kind of phobia or something, whatever was around that, my subconscious was picking up. So if it was this blue painting on the wall during a panic attack or during this heightened fearful response that I had, I would unconsciously be walking down the street, and I'd go to the mall and I'd see a blue painting. Next thing I know, that would be a trigger, but it would be unconscious, right? And so I had to learn how to respond to fear, which was the biggest thing. Instead of going, I got this willingness, I've got this willpower today, I'm not going to let anxiety stop me. I needed a plan. I needed 3 steps, which I mentioned earlier, in order for me to be prepared for fear and anxiety, right? And that's crucial for sufferers out there.
So you create those plans with people when you're working with them, regardless of what kind of anxiety they're facing.
Absolutely. It starts with mindset, and then it goes on to skill sets. If you don't have the mindset, the skill sets are useless.
Right.
If you don't have the proper approach as far as the willingness to learn, the willingness to change, if you don't, it gets to a point where when people start to disidentify from who they think they are, that's when change starts to happen.
Okay.
So, I could say that I am a tennis player or I play tennis, and those 2 statements will lead me in 2 different directions.
Yes.
I'll either own something, I am anxiety, or I do anxious things, right?
Right.
And when I think about it in those 2 ways, one has a challenge behind it, which is in fact very doable, and the other I own. So a lot of people with anxiety bring it with them all day long because like a smoker. I mean, if you tell a smoker to quit smoking, but they're always thinking that they're a smoker, there's no hope.
So this is identity change. Is how you coach people. Let's change your actual identity.
I do everything based around identity.
That's very profound.
Exactly. And that goes back to NLP. I mean, guys like, you probably know Anthony Robbins. There's a couple others out there that are very inspiring. And I started with those people. And I said, you know what? And no, I've got lots of therapist friends, but what is the quickest way for me to create change in people? That was the question, right? I didn't want to become involved in psychoanalysis where I was talking about anxiety for decades, just 25 to 30% success rate. I wasn't okay with that. So I said, what's the fastest way? So the combination of CBT and NLP, where we're going conscious, unconscious, that was powerful. And identity, like you mentioned, was huge, huge.
So those are the three components. Mm-hmm. Neuro-linguistic programming, which addresses the unconscious levels. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which addresses the conscious, which you can actively deal with. And then shifting your identity into somebody who has an anxiety disorder but doesn't have to take that with them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, as soon as I talk to people, and we're doing a session and such, and I'll kind of work on ways to break their pattern, because I picked up this idea through Anthony Robbins where, let's say, Judy was having an anxiety disorder for a number of years. So I would have this talk, I would have this workshop, and I'd say, hey, Judy, stand up and tell me about your anxiety. Tell me about your life. And you'd stand up and you'd go, well, Dennis, my life is deteriorating in all aspects of my life. I'm over worrying about everything. I'm restless. And in that peak of your physiology where you're, drowning and I could see that your tones are monotone, your voice tones, and you're really suffering there, I would have a glass of water in my hand. And the first thing I do is I'd splash you in the face with that glass of water. And therefore breaking that pattern. Yeah. Right. And this is something where Anthony Robbins does all the time. And so when Judy would stand up again after a couple minutes of anger going, Dennis, I came here for healing, this and that. Next thing I know, you're ruining my shirt and my makeup. And I say, okay, Judy, okay. And then you get to the point where you're relaxed. And I'd say, Judy, go back to that same state that you were in. And so now it becomes much, much harder for you to get back into that same, place that you were in before. Right. And then I'd keep the process going until the point where you just completely disidentified from who you thought you were. Right. So
that's a good way for people to understand your coaching process.
Totally.
And what has to happen to get there. So there are going to be some moments of.
Absolutely. If you're doing a workshop with me, expect to get drowned with water. If you're or something else, I got Nerf guns, I got all sorts of stuff to break your patterns, right?
But I can tell you that is a lot less painful than the psychoanalysis you were talking about.
Totally. I mean,
drawing out all that misery and getting nowhere. Yeah, I'll take the glass of water. So
totally. I don't believe in sugarcoating things. I mean, there's way too much sugarcoating out there through friends, through support teams, through, certain professionals. I'm not going to name any out there, but I truly believe a way of direct coaching, a way of direct sessions with people where you tell them what's going on, what they need to do. And if they're on board and they're committed to change, change will happen. They don't have to believe it necessarily, but if they commit to it and say, I'm going to stay on this path, it happens.
And I'm going to ask you about that because I have my questions here. You said they don't have to believe it. And when I was researching your site and all your wonderful works, I came across the quote that you put on, I think one of your blogs maybe. And it says, don't believe everything you think. Okay. So that leads me right to that question because, when we have a thought, we automatically assume, hey, we're the expert. How do we question? How can we question what we think, our very own thoughts? A lot of people haven't started doing that at all for themselves. Are there any steps they can use to question these thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll, the biggest thing for me was I had to question not only the world, not only my friends. I had to audit my friends list. I had to question the routines and rituals I was doing on a daily basis. I had to question what I believed, because we're unconscious beings. I mean, we're taking in information from all sorts of different areas. When we take in all that information, we do one of three things with that information. We either delete it, we distort it, or we generalize it. So those are three things that our mind does automatically, depending on what was there first. So if I was 7 years old and my dad slapped my mom in the face and said, I did that out of love, honey, that would be the very thing that I compared everything else to in my future life around. Okay. So if there was something that came up, I would delete, distort, generalize around that first experience. Whatever came first is going to be the very thing that we compare everything else to, either being good or bad, safe, dangerous, whatever it is. So I had to question my own personal belief systems. Everything. I had to, when we come to this world, we come as a blank slate, nothing, zero. All the fears that we have, we learned, right? All the anxiousness that we have, we've learned. So if we can learn it, we can also unlearn it. But it truly takes this idea that I'm going to overcome this kind of stubbornness, this perfectionist attitude that I have, and if for example, my mom, right? If I told my mom, for instance, Mom, these are the things that are causing your anxiety, this fear, she would say, Dennis, you're joking, right? There's no chance that I'm actually taking the time to go over my belief systems and my routines and such, because I'm comfortable where I am. I'm comfortable. Change is painful.
Yes.
It's painful to change because thinking is painful for humans. To think is painful. Most people would rather die than to think. They would rather live in a world of being comfortable in their comfort zone, knowing what to expect tomorrow, than to think their way through it, because there's temporary pain there. There's uncomfortableness there, right?
Absolutely.
And that's something that it takes. I mean, I have to go back to my tennis days where I developed this self-discipline, this idea that, there's a journey there, this long game, right? When I looked at anxiety as being this 3-month process rather than a day-to-day, am I getting better? I read a book, am I better now? I did one session, am I better now? Instead of going it that way, as soon as I did the long game and I said 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, that pressure started to come off, yes. Right? And so when the pressure started to come off, I created some space. Then I said, I got something to work with here. What's happening in between this space here? How can I really reconstruct myself, recondition myself? So it's possible. It's very, very possible, but it does take, like I mentioned, the proper mindset first, right? Yeah. As far as how you want to approach this whole ordeal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love your story. I love, and as I'm listening to you speak, from my spiritual part of me is saying, everybody around Dennis felt like he had this amazing athletic talent, and they were going to give him this gift of, athleticism. But what your soul's purpose may have been, if you believe those kinds of things, where you were being trained to understand what anxiety is and help people to get through it.
Totally. And, I got to mention this, Judy, because everybody's been successful in some aspect of their lives. Everybody has something that they can truly stand up and go, I was a warrior in that aspect of my life, whether it's career, relationships, anything. And, when we start to go, well, if I can do it in that aspect of my life, if I can implement those habits, those routines, then anxiety in this direction, if I take the same approach, play the long game, become knowledgeable, become willing to learn and change, I can also implement that into this aspect of my life. So it's within everybody. With NLP, there's this presupposition that if one person can do it, so can you, right? So again, it's coming back to this idea that, it's not, there's no magic wand out there. There truly isn't. There are faster ways to overcome this ruminating, anxiety-filled world that you live in. Of course there is, But we just have to do the research and have the willingness to step out of our comfort zone temporarily, be uncomfortable temporarily, as we start to keep moving towards that end goal, that end dream that we want, right?
Absolutely. And that just generalizes from dealing with your anxiety to just dealing with life itself. And we have to keep putting ourselves out there, keep going, and keep approaching it and working through it, because that's where the growth happens, whatever it is. And I love that you said go for the long haul, because then it does take the pressure off, but it does give you that space where there can be respite in between that. And that's what allows you to, I think, keep going.
Totally. So. Absolutely. I mean, I can't take away any of the pain that people are going through. I mean, in my words, I may make it seem like, oh, Dennis, you're saying it and it's so easy, and you've been through it and you've overcome it. I get that, but I'm struggling here, right? Again, we're talking about identity. Again, we're talking about attachment, right?
Which is interesting, because sometimes, I'm sorry to interrupt, but sometimes people don't want to let go of that because it serves a purpose for them. So I would encourage listeners to say, hey, what is my anxiety doing for me? Because if you can identify what it's doing for you, you can replace and get that need met some other way. Would you agree with that?
Powerful. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned that we hold on to something, and there are certain parts in our bodies and in our minds that, due to this anxiety, we need something. It's asking for something, and we're avoiding it. We're not paying attention to it. Every feeling is basically a message, right? And when we have a feeling, it's almost like, when we get a bad feeling, we're driving in our car and all of a sudden there's this crappy memory that showed up from when I was 12. What's the first thing we tend to do? We turn the music up louder. We push that aside. We don't deal with it, right? And so then it shows up even stronger and stronger and stronger in the future. It manifests. So the biggest thing here is to go, feeling, message. Feeling equals the same message I get when I get into my car and I look at the dashboard and the oil light's low and the gas is low and the battery and all that sort of stuff. These are all messages, right? And when we get these negative kind of fearful feelings, there's something there that a part of you is trying to get your attention with, right? I mean, are you avoiding it? Are you pushing it aside? Are you giving it attention? Are you trying to figure it out? And I'll tell people something. I mean, it is not as difficult as we tend to make life so much more complicated than what it is, through the media, through whatever. And fear sells in today's day and age. I get that. But fear and negativity is so loud in today's world that it seems so very difficult to take a big problem and go, you know what? I can in fact solve this in a matter of a couple of weeks or months or whatever it is. I mean, to take that is very difficult, especially if you've been suffering for years. So we have to get to the point to go, you know what? There are so many success stories out there. Dennis's success stories. I can build on that, because the first thing I ever did was I started to not Google my symptoms, but Googled success stories. What did other people do? There are so many athletes out there that overcame this, non-athletes, doesn't matter, right? So I could change my routines from Googling symptoms to Googling influencers. I could definitely go from ruminating over thoughts to breaking a pattern with my elastic band, or taking a cold shower or anything like that. Instead of waking up in the morning with my cortisol levels being high and getting stuck in that whole cycle, I could use that for fuel and run up a hill, or go for a bike ride, or go for a hike. I could use that adrenaline for something good, right?
I love that. That's wonderful. That success is what that is.
Totally. Absolutely.
And, go ahead. Well, I would like to end this with, can you give some tips for those who love somebody with anxiety? I mean, we could obviously talk on this topic all day, because it's fascinating, and you are a wealth of information, and I so appreciate you. But could you give us that, and then let us know how people can reach you? So, but yeah, someone has a loved one and they're suffering. What should they do?
You know what, Judy? If you truly care about somebody suffering from GAD, you will take the time to educate yourself. You will overcome this bewilderment, because there is a certain part of us, again, that goes back to being lazy, or this idea that, it's easier to tell somebody that everything will be okay, or go do a meditation session, or learn to relax. I mean, these are things that you tell people that have stress, daily stressors. This is stuff you don't tell to people suffering from an anxiety disorder.
Gotcha.
So first and foremost, end the laziness. Stop telling yourself this story. Stop, living in a comfort zone. If you're someone that has somebody that you love so much and is suffering from anxiety, get educated. There are a number of books out there around anxiety, a number of success stories. Go get involved in that. And we've got an amazing Facebook page that is based around outcome thinking. And I tend to kick people out there if they feel like they're being too much of a victim. If I see that someone is constantly playing out this role that I'm suffering, and there's this wealth of knowledge there, 15 to 18 posts on a weekly basis, and you're not reading those, you're constantly ruminating over the same pattern that you're running, then I will in fact take that person and go, hey, you know what? Change this approach. You can do this. I'll talk to those people, right? But it starts with that, and we need to help people create the drive to change more than anything. We need to guide them. We need to have the proper guidance through education around this disorder, as they begin to learn how to hold themselves accountable, right? For their actions, for their routines and such. So the number one thing more than anything, because the advice gets so much better when we start to in fact educate ourselves around what anxiety is, because we don't know what anxiety is. If you haven't experienced it, if you haven't gone through GAD or health anxiety, it's very difficult to give a loved one the proper advice or the proper tools, skill sets, right? And the first thing we tend to do is, hey, go to therapy. Go to your psychiatrist, psychologist, which are fantastic, by the way, absolutely fantastic. But it's a starting point, right? It's just information, knowledge, regressing you a little bit to the past. But it all begins and ends with you. That's something that we need to understand. People can help us to a point. They can educate themselves. They can give us some good advice. But it all comes down to your willingness to learn, to implement the stuff, and to continue to understand that this is a journey. There's no finish line with self-mastery. Self-mastery begins here, and it's going to carry on for the rest of your life, and that's important.
Absolutely. That's what we're here to do, is learn. So,
yeah.
And lessons and challenges come at us in many different ways. And for a lot of us, it comes at us in an anxiety situation, with a diagnosis like this. So totally. Wonderful information, and thank you for sharing your story and being so open and authentic with all of this. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much, Judy. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So how can people reach you, Dennis, if they would like to work with you, or they just like to get on your website or access? I think you have a free gift on there too, don't you?
I've got on anxietyexit.com, I've got my personal story, which is me versus myself on and off the court. There's an opt-in there. There's a sign up. So you sign up, you get the ebook, learn about my story, the journey, get inspired. That's one way. As well, on anxietyexit.com, you'll find there's a contact side there, a menu item that you can get a hold of me. As well, there's the End the Anxiety program, which has helped thousands of people worldwide suffering from GAD, and that takes a CBT/NLP approach to it. So there's a number of ways that you guys can get a hold of me. I'm answering almost every question there is on my YouTube videos. So if you guys are a fan of YouTube, you can go on one of those videos, ask a question. I've almost turned that into social media itself, where someone will ask a question and I'll be right there, because this is something that I'm so passionate about. So you will get your answer for any question that you put on YouTube. I guarantee that, guys. So I'm looking forward to getting in touch with you guys and helping you guys out.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. I truly appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being an important part of the Anxiety Guy podcast community. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a positive rate and review. If you're searching for further support on your road to recovery from anxiety, head over to anxietyexit.com and take part in the powerful End the Anxiety program based around the CBT model. If you're searching for a more one-on-one approach, you can sign up now for personal coaching sessions with Dennis via Skype. Remember, you are more than anxiety. See you in the next episode.